Hi everybody, it's Kathy, and I'm here to do the Edward Insane's Finding Inspiration tag, and I have Nelson with me. He came to work with me today, um, and some of my students thought he was creepy, and some of my students thought he was cute, and yeah, so but he didn't have any problems in transit. He did some nice posing, and I did a few pictures for Instagram. If you want to check those out, that would be great. So, Edward Insane's Finding Inspiration tag. How do you find inspiration? When making a character story, how do you begin the process? I guess I begin the process. I don't write stories per se, but my kids all have sort of their characters, but I start with a doll. So I find a sculpt that I don't seem to be able to leave at the company and choose the doll and buy the doll. And by the time the doll gets to me, I usually have some stuff figured out about them. So that's how I get my characters. And story-wise, just how they connect with the other characters that I have. Where do I find my most inspiration is probably on YouTube, with the people I follow on YouTube, like Denali and Resin Wonders and Ann Picaro and Ricky Starr and tons of other people. So that's and maybe a little tiny bit of sort of what I learn or what I know about the lives of my students, because my kids, my dolls are young adults and little kids, and so sometimes there's some crossover. I have one doll that her style was really kind of modeled after a student I had at one point, and yeah, so that's where my inspiration comes from. Do I make my characters for a sculpt you like, or do you have characters and find a sculpt that matches them? So I guess I already answered that. I find a sculpt first, and then the character comes from that. Except for Nelson, who was my sort of tribute doll to my father, and so he was absolutely a character, and he had appearance already. He had, this little piece of resin had big shoes to fill. So let's see. Do you have different inspirations for your different characters or stories? So my MSDs and YOSDs are basically kind of a real life sort of deal. And then my Pookie Pookies are more fantasy-y. They don't really have a story exactly yet, but they're kind of crossover between, like, they've got some furniture, but they're really kind of woodsy people. So yeah, so I guess there's a combination of that. And then I have no story at all really for Perry and Rowan. They're my 20 centimeter dolls. They're just really cute, and they do assorted things and go places with me, but not so much a story. When creating a character, how do you visualize them? I can't draw, so I visualize them either completely in my head or a combination between that and pictures I find. For instance, she's this little girl. I had a whole page of pictures for her in terms of her style, her hair color, what I wanted her face to look like, and mostly from Flickr and places like that. And I just made a file on my computer with that. So where do you go to find inspiration? I feel like I already answered that one. I guess that's because that's where I find most of my inspiration. I also find inspiration in books and movies and TV shows, some as well. And what do you do when you don't feel inspired? Um, I just wait. I don't do anything specifically to make myself feel inspired, or sometimes I will spend the time in between organizing things or sorting things, uh, writing records of things. So I try to keep a file going for each of my dolls and what's going on with them, and so I make sure that those are all up to date. And usually by the time I've done that, maybe changed clothes or those sorts of things, I've got my inspiration for the next great project. Um, yeah. So I think that's all the questions that were in this tag. I've really enjoyed watching everybody else's responses and hearing everybody else's responses, especially responses from people who actually are writing, you know, regularly or sort of more seriously than I do. Yeah, so that's the Edward Insane's Finding Inspiration tag, and I hope you enjoy.